The Juneteenth holiday. On the phone to share with us a bit about the history behind the holiday and some tidbits about Utah's own history on the topic is Professor Paul Reeve, the Simmons Chair of Mormon Studies in the History Department of the University of Utah. Good morning, Professor Reeve, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So, Professor Reeve, let's start with a little bit of background. While I know the Juneteenth holiday has been around for a couple of years, and not everybody understands what it's all about. What does the Juneteenth holiday commemorate?
The Juneteenth holiday commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Union troops arrive at Galveston Bay in Texas and basically announce to the enslaved people there that they are in fact free. So freedom actually uh, takes Union troops to ensure that freedom is realized. And for those in Galveston, Texas, even though the Civil War had been over for over 2 months by that point, it takes Union troops arriving to enforce freedom. And so that comes to be enshrined and remembered as Juneteenth.
And when was the proclamation signed? In other words, how long, what was the time gap between when President Lincoln signed the proclamation and the Juneteenth?
Well, the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect January 1st, 1863. But you have to remember the Emancipation Proclamation does not free enslaved peoples in states that were loyal to the Union. It only frees enslaved people in the Confederacy as an act of war. Lincoln believes he has constitutional right to do this because of war powers. But remember that the Confederacy doesn't recognize him as president. And so really, it's only where Union troops are present and have freed significant areas of the Confederate South that enslaved people are, in fact, set free. So it goes into effect January 1st, 1863, but in practice, it varies across the Confederate States by simply the presence of the Union Army.
Was Texas sort of the last frontier in terms of when this information got out, in terms of slaveholding states and territories?
Yes, I mean that's why we have this whole Juneteenth because uh, enslaved people themselves are left out of any sort of communication network, right? So there might be underground kind of networks where word is getting passed around, but they're not getting texts about this, and it takes the arrival of Union forces in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865 for the enslaved people to have the assurance of freedom or to even be aware that they have been freed. Um, so yeah, that's a part of what's going on here. But it's important to remember then the rest of the states that might have remained loyal to the Union, they wait until the 13th Amendment to the Constitution is passed, and that's ratified in December of 1865. So that finally outlaws slavery everywhere. The
Mhm.
Emancipation Proclamation only in states that were in rebellion against the United States.
So let's talk about the holiday. When did the sort of Juneteenth become the notion of creating a holiday around Juneteenth start to come together?
Uh, you know, there have been people like Opal Lee in Texas who have been advocating for this for a number of years. Uh, there are groups who, especially African American civic groups, or a variety of other groups of that nature, who have celebrated Juneteenth. But in terms of a national holiday, Opal Lee uh, is a community organizer, leader in Texas who was advocating for this and finally came to fruition in 2021 when President Joe Biden signed it into law.
And are there sort of commemorative events going on around Utah for that you're aware of for the holiday?
I think they're mostly community based,
Hmm.
and so it would be a matter of, I think, checking in with local, city and community based organizations. Largely, people celebrate through picnics or community based organizations that might commemorate the events at the end of the Civil War. This is a second freedom for the nation. Abraham Lincoln defines, the Civil War as a new birth of freedom, finally resolving the great American paradox that a nation founded on principles of liberty and freedom simultaneously countenances the enslavement of human beings. And the Civil War finally reconciles that, and the 13th Amendment outlaws enslavement. So, yeah, um, sort of memories of that get commemorated, but now it's nationwide where we are celebrating finally the eradication of slavery.
I want to talk a little bit about slavery in Utah. I mean, most of us, when we hear the term slavery, we think about slavery in the 19th century. We think about the cotton industry and the way in which so much of the nation's economy was tied up with the use of slavery to generate cotton. That I don't think we grew cotton in Utah, but there apparently were some slaves. Let's talk about a little bit about how slavery came to Utah and when.
Yes, slavery arrives in Utah, or African American slavery arrives in Utah on July 22nd, 1847, 2 days ahead of Brigham Young's arrival in the Salt Lake Valley. There were three Black enslaved men who were sent ahead by their Latter-day Saint enslavers as a part of Orson Pratt's Vanguard group, who are the first to arrive in the Salt Lake Valley on July 22nd. They camp around 50 East and 1700 South that first night, and then move north and are plowing and planting by the time Brigham Young arrives on July 24th. The state of Utah today commemorates Brigham Young's arrival, but it's important to remember that the first Vanguard group arrives 2 days ahead, and that includes three enslaved men: Green Flake, Oscar Smith, and Harkwells. And two of them are baptized Latter-day Saints. So they're white Latter-day Saint enslavers, send them ahead to to build shelter and plant crops so that when the white enslavers arrive the following year in 1848, they will have a place to live and food to eat. So slavery arrives with the Vanguard group of Latter-day Saints in the Salt Lake Valley. There are also forms of indigenous slavery taking place that Latter-day Saints are also drawn into pretty quickly after their arrival. So it's here from the beginning. African American enslavement is here from the beginning, and then other Latter-day Saints who are converts to the faith from the South will bring their Black enslaved with them over the next several years into Utah territory. The most who are present at any one moment in time that historians can verify are 56 enslaved people. A contingent go to help establish San Bernardino in California in 1851. So for most of the next decade, between 1852 and 1862, between 30 and 40 enslaved people exist in the Salt Lake. Well, I shouldn't say just the Salt Lake Valley, but in Utah territory.
So was the ter I guess so I guess the territory formerly would be considered a slave allowing jurisdiction, right? I mean, I suppose I guess it was legal.
Well, the territorial legislature passes a law in 1862 designed to define the legal relationship between white enslavers and their Black enslaved. And the law that they pass is distinct from chattel slavery as practiced in the South. The question that is animating the nation and dividing the nation ultimately will not be solvable except for the loss of 600,000 lives and a civil war is, can human beings be held as property? And Northerners tend to say, no, that's a violation of the founding principles of the nation. And Southerners say, yes, in fact, they can be held as property, and the Constitution protects our property rights. You cannot strip us of our property, including human beings. So the law that Utah passes does elevate the enslaved people in Utah Territory above the condition of mere chattel or property. It grants them some rights, but it frees no one then enslaved. It does not pass on the condition of servitude to the next generation. If you're born to enslaved parents in Utah Territory, we believe that the law that is passed does not pass on that condition to the next generation. So over time, it could be seen as a conservative form of gradual emancipation. It does grant enslaved people some rights. It requires them to be educated. In the South, you could not be educated. It was against the law in the South. Utah law requires it. It says an enslaver cannot sell their enslaved to another enslaver without their consent. If you have consent, you're not property.
Hmm.
So there are aspects of Utah's law that elevates them above the condition of property. But like I said, it does not free anyone then enslaved. You have to understand in the 19th century, there are a spectrum of unfree labor categories.
Right.
We tend to think in the 21st century of only free and enslaved. There are apprenticeships, there are indentured servants, and the law defines those who are enslaved in Utah as servants and grants them some rights, but does not free anyone.
Now, at the time, was there any kind of sort of moral debate going on within the church and the church-related governing bodies about the morality of slavery?
Absolutely. There is a protracted debate over this bill that passes in 1852. It's called an Act in Relation to Service. And one legislator who was also a Latter-day Saint apostle, so there's the overlapping of religion and politics in the territory, who says, okay, I don't care about the fine distinctions. Any method of unfree labor is in fact slavery. And he proposes that the bill be rejected outright and tells his legislative colleagues that if they pass this bill, it will be enough to cause the angels in heaven to blush. That man is Orson Pratt. Brigham Young, is in a debate with Orson Pratt, and theology gets mixed with politics as these two men debate this. But probably the most significant outcome of Orson Pratt's position is that after his very animated anti-slavery speech, the bill is modified. As originally drafted, it would have passed the condition of servitude on to the next generation, making it perpetual. That clause that would have passed the condition to the next generation is removed from the bill. It's crossed out and isn't included in the final bill. Therefore, we believe the intent is that those who are born into to enslaved parents in Utah Territory do not inherit the condition of their parents. Therefore, similar to free womb laws being passed in Mexico at the time, that if you are born to enslaved parents, you don't inherit their condition. You would have been born into freedom. So, yes, there is a very heated debate over this bill in territorial Utah. Orson Pratt doesn't win the day, but he does have influence on the shape of the final bill.
So I want to talk a little bit about, how sort of the Emancipation Proclamation, the sort of the notion of the slaves being free, how is that communicated to and reacted to here in Utah?
Yeah, so this is separate from the Emancipation Proclamation. So most people are just not aware that this even existed. But on June 20th, 1862, Abraham Lincoln signs into law a bill called an Act to Secure Freedom to All Persons Within the Territories of the United States.
Hmm.
So remember, the Emancipation Proclamation only
Only, oh,
uh, governs those in rebellion against the states in rebellion against the United States. This law is passed for those who exist in territories, not states. And Utah is a territory in 1862. And as such is subject to congressional rule. And so the Republican Party, when it's first founded in 1856, founding plank in its presidential platform is that Congress has the right and imperative duty to prohibit in the territories the twin relics of barbarism, slavery, and polygamy. And Congress and Abraham Lincoln make good on that promise when Republicans are in control in 1862. They pass a law prohibiting polygamy in the territories and a law prohibiting slavery in the territories. So, in um, according to the law, then Utah's legal Juneteenth is June 20th, 1862, really ahead of the rest of the nation in terms of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. The challenge is, how do enslaved people find out about that, right? So for Juneteenth in Texas, it requires Union troops to arrive. We don't have the arrival of Union troops in Utah. The only evidence that we found of an announcement of this law that is passed is published in the Deseret News in July of 1862 on page 4, buried in the middle of a column titled From Washington. There are no banner headlines, no big announcements. Yay, slavery is over in Utah Territory. It's really buried in the middle of a column on page 4 of the Deseret News. So, as historians, it's really difficult to ferret out, when do enslaved people learn that they have been freed in Utah Territory. And it's very possible that they may have had to have waited until the end of the Civil War in 1865, the passage of the 13th Amendment in December of 1865, even though the legal end to Utah, to slavery in Utah, would have been June 20th, 1862.
I have to ask, given that it sounds like there was not a lot of publicity surrounding this, was there more publicity surrounding the polygamy ban, which might have been a little bit more of a significant issue here in Utah?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, Latter-day Saint leaders are concerned about that, and they will spend the rest of the 19th century pushing back against the increasingly stringent laws that are passed against polygamy, and won't capitulate until 1890, when the federal government attempts to confiscate Latter-day Saint temple properties. So that has its own history, but yes, they are much more concerned about the passage of the anti-polygamy law in 1862.
So I take it when you try to trace what happened to those few slaves that were remaining by at this point in time, it's really hard to figure out when they were liberated or how they were liberated or what happened to them. The
Yeah,
chain just sort of runs out.
exactly right. Frustratingly, uh, they don't leave a written record. We do have one formerly enslaved man who was interviewed by a Black-owned newspaper in Utah at the end of the 19th century. So, you know, his recollection is impacted by memory,
Sure.
and he doesn't specify how he first learns. He says, we were all very enslaved people in Utah Territory were very excited when we learned we won our freedom through the fortunes of war, which if you're reading contextually, might indicate that it might have been the end of the Civil War by the time they learned this. And as historians, we could find no evidence to indicate maybe that enslavers are responding to the 1862 law that Lincoln signed into law. So it's just an open question. June 20th, 1865 is Utah's legal end to slavery. In practice, how long does it last? And we don't know.
We've been talking with Professor Paul Reeve, the Simmons Chair of Mormon Studies at the University of Utah. Professor Reeve, thanks for helping us learn so much about Juneteenth and for spending the time with us this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
We'll be right back after this.